My name is Linda Carter. And, last Thanksgiving, my son slapped me across the face. It still sounds unreal when I say it out loud. One moment, I was carving the turkey under the soft glow of candlelight. And the next, the room went silent, except for the sharp sound of his hand meeting my skin. But I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood there. My cheek burning. My breath steady. And I smiled. That smile changed everything. Though no one in that room understood it yet. I live alone now. In a small white house on the edge of a quiet Vermont town. The kind of place where the mornings smell like pine and wood smoke. And you can hear the distant hum of church bells at 8 o'clock. After my divorce, I traded marble floors for creaking wood. Noise for silence. I told myself I had chosen peace even if peace sometimes came with loneliness. My days became simple, a cup of tea at 7:30. Tending to the garden. Feeding the stray cat that visits my porch. Life shrank into rituals. Soft and predictable. I had believed that Thanksgiving would be like any other, a gathering stitched together by habit. Not love. Still. I cooked the same way I always did with care. With hope that maybe, just maybe, the warmth of the house could fill the gaps we no longer spoke about. Family has a way of making you forget your own boundaries until someone reminds you cruelly where you stand. When I think back now, I realize that the slap didn't begin that evening. It started long before in the quiet years when I mistook endurance for harmony. And though I didn't know it then, that Thanksgiving was about to become the night. Everything I'd silently carried came undone. After the divorce, my life became smaller, not in a sad way, but in the kind that feels like breathing after holding your breath for too long. I remember the first morning I woke up alone in this house. The air was cold, still, and the silence almost startled me. I made tea at 7 sharp, the way I always did, and stood by the kitchen window watching the fog roll over the hills. For the first time in years, no one was asking for anything from me. No phone calls about work. No reminders about bills or errands. Just stillness. And in that stillness, I realized how much of myself I had lost while trying to keep everyone else comfortable. I had been married to Gregory for 40 years. We built a life together, or at least I thought we did. He was ambitious. Sharp. The kind of man who filled a room with confidence. I used to admire that about him. But over the years, that confidence turned into something colder. Something that needed control more than companionship. Our home became quiet not because we ran out of things to say, but because I learned that my words often had no place to land. The distance grew slowly. The way frost creeps over glass, silent, invisible, and irreversible. When we finally divorced, I didn't fight for much. He kept the big house in Connecticut. The furniture. The art he loved, showing off to guests. I took what I needed, a few boxes of books. My mother's teacups. And this small house in Vermont. Here. The porch creaks when you walk on it. The roses bloom late. And the nights are so still you can hear the wind brushing against the trees. It's not luxury. But it's mine. My children visit sometimes. Though less often now. Ethan, my eldest, lives close by, but is always busy meetings. Deadlines. His own family. Chloe works in marketing and seems to live out of her suitcase. And Hannah, my youngest, stopped calling for a while after the divorce. As if she couldn't choose between us. I don't blame them. Divorce has a way of scattering people. Even when no one intends it. Still, some nights, I set the table for 2 out of habit. And when I catch myself, I just smile and shake my head. Lately, though, I've felt something shifting, a kind of tension I can't quite name. The days are still quiet, but the silence feels heavier. Expectant. Like the air right before a storm. I used to think peace was the absence of noise. Now I know it can also be the space where storms begin to gather. It was late afternoon. The kind of soft November light that turns everything golden for a few fleeting minutes before fading to gray. I had just finished setting the dining table, the good linen folded neatly. The old silver polished. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted squash. And for a brief moment, I felt content. Then the phone rang. The sound broke through the stillness so sharply that I flinched before reaching for it. It was Ethan. His voice, warm but hurried, filled the quiet house. He was calling to confirm Thanksgiving plans, the usual small talk. The details about who would bring what. But somewhere between his words, I felt something tighten inside me. He mentioned that his father might stop by early. That Gregory needed me to sign a few documents about the lake house. He said it lightly, almost casually, as if it were just another errand to cross off before dinner. But my mind snagged on the word documents. The lake house. That place was more than wood and water, it was memory. It was laughter echoing across the dock. The smell of sunscreen on my children's skin. Gregory's hand at my back during those summers, when we still felt like a family. I hadn't stepped foot there in years. I hung up. But the silence afterward felt different, heavier. Deliberate. My hands rested on the counter, still dusted with flour. Something in his tone, polite but practiced, left me uneasy. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that my mind was playing tricks. But as I looked at the list on my fridge, cranberry sauce, gravy, cider, I realized it was missing something I couldn't quite name. That night, the house seemed too quiet. Even the clock ticked slower. Somewhere deep down, I knew peace was about to end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this Thanksgiving would be nothing like the ones before. At exactly 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. The sound felt sharper than usual, almost rehearsed. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the door, feeling that strange mix of habit and hesitation that comes from facing someone you once loved but no longer trust. When I opened it, there he was, Gregory. Perfectly composed as always. His silver hair was slicked back, his coat pressed, and that familiar cologne drifted through the doorway, clinging to the air between us like a ghost from another life. He greeted me with the kind of smile that used to charm clients and win arguments. Even now, it carried that same calculated warmth. Just enough to disarm, but never enough to feel real. I invited him in out of politeness, not affection. As he stepped inside, his eyes moved across the living room, like an inspector taking in the worn furniture. The faded photos. The life that continued without him. I could almost hear his unspoken judgment, small, simple, quiet. He always needed to feel superior. We sat in the parlor, the fire crackling low. He pulled a folder from his leather bag, a small, neat thing, harmless looking. He spoke about business, about efficiency, about the lake house. He mentioned developers, opportunities, signatures. But underneath the practiced tone, I heard something else, the faint hum of ownership, the assumption that I would comply, as I always had. I watched his lips move, his hands gesturing with that same confident precision he'd used to sign contracts, to close deals, to erase people. My chest tightened. Not from fear but recognition. He hadn't changed. Not even a little. The man who had once called me partner was now presenting me with papers meant to erase the last piece of what we had built together. For a brief second, my eyes drifted to the folder. I thought of summers at the lake house, the children laughing in the water, the scent of grilled corn, the fireflies. That house wasn't just property. It was proof that there had once been love here, even if it had long since curdled into something else. And now, he wanted to turn it into profit. He looked at me the way he used to when he thought I'd already agreed with quiet triumph. But this time, I didn't nod. I simply smiled. Small and calm. The way one does when they finally understand the game being played. Inside, something shifted, a quiet resolve I hadn't felt in years. I realized then that this Thanksgiving wouldn't be about gratitude or reunion. It would be the day I stopped letting anyone decide what I was worth. Dinner began the way it always did, laughter forced into the cracks of conversation. Silverware clinking against china. The faint scent of rosemary drifting through the air. I'd spent the morning roasting the turkey, basting it every 30 minutes, like I always had. Telling myself that traditions held families together. But as I watched them now, Gregory at the head of the table, Ethan sitting tall beside him, Chloe scrolling absently on her phone, and Hannah's hesitant smile, something inside me shifted. Their faces looked familiar. But the warmth was gone. It was a table full of strangers wearing the shape of my children. Gregory made a toast. His voice was smooth. Rehearsed. A performance of family unity. I lifted my glass and pretended to smile. But when Ethan cleared his throat afterward, I felt the room tilt. He spoke with pride, explaining that he'd accepted a new position at his father's firm, a job overseas. A fresh start. I remember thinking how happy he looked. How certain. Then he mentioned that part of the family funds from the lake house would help with the move. My stomach dropped. Then Chloe leaned forward. Her tone light but eager. Talking about her business. Her startup. How the same money could give her dream the push it needed. Their words blurred together: opportunity. Future. Stability until they became one single sound. Just sign it. Mom. And that's when I understood. I wasn't invited here to celebrate. I was brought here to agree. To surrender quietly, under the illusion of love. I looked at each of them. One by one. Ethan's eyes were steady but cold. Like someone who'd already justified his betrayal. Chloe's were softer. Uncertain. But complicit all the same. Hannah avoided my gaze entirely. Even Gregory's posture was casual. Confident, the director of a play that had gone exactly as rehearsed. For a moment, I couldn't move. The flicker of the candles blurred into small halos, and the room felt smaller. Tighter. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat loud. Insistent beneath their polite chatter. The smell of the food turned sour in my throat. Everything I'd prepared, every detail of care, had been nothing more than the stage for my humiliation. I set down my fork carefully, the clatter loud in the silence that followed. I realized, then, that betrayal doesn't always come as an explosion. Sometimes it comes dressed as gratitude, served on fine plates, and toasted with wine. And as I looked across that table at my ex-husband, at my children, at the life I thought I'd built, I finally saw the truth. The betrayal hadn't happened tonight. It had been growing quietly for years. Tonight was only the moment it decided to show its face. It happened so fast I almost didn't register it. One moment Ethan was standing, his voice rising sharp, trembling with anger, and the next, there was only heat, sound, and light. His hand struck my cheek, to the crack of it echoing through the dining room like a gunshot. The force sent me stumbling back against the serving cart. China shattered at my feet. The smell of gravy and wine mixed with something metallic in the air shock. For a hard beat, everything froze. The candles flickered. The room pulsed in silence. And I could hear nothing but the rush of blood in my ears. My face burned. But the pain didn't reach me. I touched my cheek, felt the sting, and realized I wasn't shaking. Not this time. The world around me felt far away, the gasp, the scrape of a chair, the collective silence. All of it blurred until only one truth remained. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I straightened my back. The tremor I expected never came. My breath steadied. My heart, for the first time in years, felt calm. It was as if the slap had burned away every last illusion, every hope, every excuse, every piece of the woman who had once begged for peace. What remained was stillness. And as I looked at him, my son, his hand still suspended between guilt and disbelief, I felt something I hadn't in decades: power. Quiet. Absolute power. In that silence, I understood what true strength sounded like. It wasn't rage. It was the absence of fear. The silence after the slap was almost beautiful. It hung in the air like snowfall, heavy and fragile. No one moved. No one breathed. My cheek still burned. But what I felt wasn't pain, it was clarity. For years, I had been the quiet one. The one who smoothed over the cracks, who made peace out of pieces. But that night, I realized peace had never meant silence. It meant strength. So I smiled. The look on their faces: confusion, guilt, disbelief, all blurred together. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stood still. The sound of the fire behind me, soft and steady, and let the calm take over. I knew this moment would come someday. Maybe not exactly like this, but close enough that I had prepared for it quietly, carefully, patiently. While they underestimated me, I had been learning how to protect myself. I reached for the leather folder I had tucked away earlier in the cabinet, the one no one had noticed when they arrived. My hands were steady, deliberate. Inside it were 2 sets of documents. The first, a copy of the deed to the lake house solely in my name. 3 years ago, I'd had Gregory sign it during one of his chaotic work weeks. He hadn't even read the papers, too distracted by the storm of his own success. His signature had been witnessed, notarized, sealed. It was done. As I laid the deed on the table, I felt a quiet satisfaction ripple through me. I didn't need to look at him to know his expression. I could almost hear the disbelief tightening his breath. But I wasn't finished. I opened the second folder. Inside were years of records. Bank statements, transfers, proof of the money Gregory had hidden during our marriage, offshore accounts, shell companies, falsified invoices. All neat, all traceable, all real. I had spent 2 years gathering it. With the help of a friend who knew how to find what men like him tried to bury, I placed the stack beside the deed, aligning the edges like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting into place. My voice in my head was calm. Steady, this isn't revenge. This is truth. For too long, I had been the one spoken over, dismissed, rewritten. Now, I was the one holding the story. The room stayed frozen. I didn't need their apologies, or their explanations. I didn't even need them to understand. What mattered was that I finally did that. Every insult disguised as concern, every manipulation masked as love, had led me to this. The slap had been his mistake, but my clarity was my victory. As I looked around the table at the faces that had once defined me, I felt an unfamiliar peace. Not joy, not triumph, but release. For the first time, I wasn't defending my worth. I was living it. I gathered the folders, closed them neatly, and turned toward the doorway. Behind me, the air still buzzed with shock, but I felt nothing but stillness. Power didn't need to shout, it could whisper. And as I stepped away from that table, I realized I hadn't smiled out of defiance. I'd smiled because I was finally free. The days that followed moved quietly, like the slow unfurling of dawn after a long storm. Gregory's empire began to crumble. The lawsuits, the investigations, the resignation that made the headlines. His name, once polished and powerful, turned into a whisper people avoided saying aloud. The same confidence that had once filled boardrooms now only filled courtrooms. And my children, the ones who had stood behind him that night, learned what it felt like to see the ground shift beneath their certainty. Ethan's voice trembled the first time he called. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He only wanted to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Chloe's messages came next, long, tearful confessions that sounded more like echoes than apologies. I read them all. But I didn't reply. Some lessons can't be spoken back into softness. And Hannah, my quiet one, sent a simple note that said, "I see you now." Mom. That was enough. I moved back to the lake house after the hearings ended. The water was still, the pines tall and patient as ever. In the mornings, light filtered through the windows in gold ribbons. And I'd make coffee while the mist lingered above the lake. I didn't think of victory, only peace. The kind that isn't loud or proud, but steady. One afternoon, as snow began to fall outside, I realized the silence that once haunted me now felt like home. The storm had passed, and what remained was mine, not revenge, not power, but freedom. In the quiet that followed everything, I learned that healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about no longer letting it define you. For years, I thought forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened. But now I know it begins with forgiving yourself for the years you stayed silent, for the times you accepted less than you deserved. Peace doesn't come from winning battles, it comes from knowing you don't need to fight anymore. Sometimes strength looks like walking away without a word. Sometimes love means letting go of the people who refuse to see you. I live differently now, with stillness, with boundaries, with gratitude for my own company. The hurt no longer echoes, it hums quietly beneath the surface, reminding me how far I've come. If my story touched something in you, share it. Leave a comment, or tell me what healing looks like in your life.